Welcome to the Face-to-Face Ministries podcast. I'm Kathy Little.
And I'm Melinda Wilson, and we are talking all things inner healing, true connection with Jesus, and the full benefits package of the cross. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Face-to-Face Ministries podcast, episode 15.
Wow, it's amazing. And thank you guys for continuing to listen, to share, to subscribe, rate, and review. That really helps get the word out. And it's been fun to watch the statistics
going up.
Come
on, people.
A lot of people are interested.
We appreciate you sharing this.
Yes.
This is really about helping people get healthy, helping all of us. And this is content that is not just we think everyone else needs it. We need it. I personally need it. And listening to what we're about to present to you, I was like, oh my gosh, that's right. I was doing the interview with this guest and I was re-listening to it, really getting my mind blown again and remembering what was in the interview. Like, wow.
Yeah, because we've had Dr. Carl Lehman, who is a psychiatrist and brain scientist who has been sharing the Emmanuel approach with us. And this, you may have heard him reference a guy named Dr. Jim Wilder in that episode, the past two episodes, because they actually work together to birth the research behind the Emmanuel approach. They work together, and Dr. Wilder, who we are interviewing today, was telling us about what they did as they developed this. Was the workload was a little bit too much for one, so they split up.
Shared it.
They're sharing it, and Dr. Carl Lehman has taken the Emmanuel approach and packaged it in a way that can be really transferable and accessible to train people with the tools. And Dr. Wilder is taking it to the direction of sustainability and more emotional maturity.
Yes, and more of teaching rather than inner healing prayer ministry. Dr. Carl, as we affectionately call him, actually does still minister the Emmanuel approach as well as teach it. And he has a private practice for his psychiatry practice, but Dr. Jim Wilder is more on the teaching, getting the word out about brain science and teaching it as far as why it is possible, because this is really groundbreaking stuff to learn how to operate out of a fully functioning brain, a fully functioning heart, operate in maturity. And as you get to hear this podcast today, how do we pull ourselves out from when we fall into a spiral or vortex where we feel like, oh my gosh, I can't get out of this negative emotion or out of this panic. And it'll be really life-changing if we apply these principles.
It's really fascinating to listen to him describe and explain how the brain works in different situations. And we're really excited to share this content with you. We're going to do this in two parts because it's a lot to chew on in just one. So we're going to give this two parts. This is part one with Dr. James Wilder, and he is a neurotheologian, which is kind of like, what does that mean? And basically, this man has studied scripture and spiritual formation and brain science all in the same context. And it's pretty fascinating. So we're excited to jump right into part one with Dr. Jim Wilder.
So we are with Dr. Jim Wilder today. Dr. Jim, I'm just going to call you Dr. Jim. Because you studied a lot, and you deserve the title of Dr. Jim.
Oh, well, it did cost a lot of money at the time.
First of all, tell us who Dr. Jim Wilder is and how did you get to be where you're at? What do you do?
Well, at this point, what I call my work is neurotheology. And it's actually a rather old field. It's been around since the 4th century when the first neurotheologian came along and tried to explain how is it that we go about living in a human body doing what God wants to do. And that's sort of the interface of those two things. As a boy, I was very interested in solving or curing diseases that we hadn't figured out about. So kind of the mystery of what is it that causes us to get sick or as human beings to malfunction, to stop being the kind of people we want to be? And what would you do if you wanted to actually turn that back around? That makes me very, very curious. So at some level or another, I'm just always watching to see, how do things work? What makes sense? And if it makes sense to me, does it make sense to God? Do those two things fit together? Very wide field, really, if you think about it.
Well, if you were to define neurotheology, which I think yesterday was the first time I've heard that term. I've heard neuroscientist, brain scientist. I just call it, when I've talked about you a lot, quote you a lot, I say he's a Christian brain scientist. But a more apt description is a neurotheologian. Yeah,
because you're looking somewhat in depth at the nervous system and somewhat in depth at theology. But another way to talk about it's the science of spirituality.
Please share what that means, because that sounds so fascinating to me.
Yeah, well, if there's actually a way that makes sense, that there are any patterns to what it means to be spiritual people, then there should be a science, an observable pattern that we could look at. And if we, let's say, another way of saying that is, if we want to learn to be spiritual, shouldn't we learn that in the way that the brain learns? Since that's our learning mechanism, right? We learn with our brain. So whatever we learn about spirituality, if we learn that in the way that the brain learns things, we'll do much better. So, for instance, if I was to continue this lecture in a different language you didn't know, it wouldn't do your brain very much good. Yeah. As true as it might be, right? You'd learn nothing from it. And that might sound pretty simple, but I think if your brain, for instance, doesn't understand how relationships work, and you try to say there's a relational God, but relationships don't make any more sense to you than, let's say, some African language might, your brain will make no sense of, well, what do you mean a relational? God wants a relationship with you? I don't understand relationships. In fact, relationships, as close as I get it, are the people that always hurt me. So why would I want that with God? That's the kind of thing we're talking about here. So we've got patterns, we've got state-dependent learning. For instance, most of us have noticed that when we're scared, we act differently than we do when we're happy. So sometimes when we're scared, we don't think of even options. Like the most common thing, your brain just wants things to stop. So you're thinking, how am I going to make this stop? How am I going to make this stop? People try to outrun bears. Bears will run 40 miles an hour. It's the dumbest thing to plan in the world. But because all we can think about when we're scared is, what we know. Do we stop and pray? Well, no, because we're not used to, when we're in our scared mode, there are no thoughts of God around usually, right? So this is, again, all parts of how do we learn to be who we're meant to be.
Well, that leads me to I have many questions, but see which one makes sense. Stuck in places that we're not designed to be, and that's fear, and I know, or the big emotion, or disgust, or what are the...
Now, there's actually 6 unpleasant emotions that are hardwired into the brain, and so there's sadness, anger, shame, disgust, hopeless despair, and I just lost...
Fear.
Fear, yeah, that's the other one.
Well, so, see, I'm a brain scientist. I'm a neurotheologian. What do we do? And of course, I teach Shaloming Your Body. I've sent people your videos, but for those that aren't aware that are new to it, what do I do? And I'd actually like you to demonstrate it. What do I do when I'm stuck in a state of panic or a state of fear or that anxiety or the hopeless despair where I'm just like, and people even say, oh, I'm going down a spiral, or, oh my God, I can't stop this spiral. What can I do practically to get myself unstuck?
Well, I will try to answer that question. I'll also try to say why it's not a particularly good question.
Okay.
And the reason is, if you were stuck in the ocean in a hurricane, and you asked me, could would you show me how to swim to get out of this hurricane? I'd probably say to you, it's a little late to try to figure out how to swim when it's the world's worst conditions, right? So one of the things we have to teach our brain to do it when the conditions are very mild. Like when I learned to scuba dive, we learned in a swimming pool, the most boring place in the world, possibly. I mean, all you see is tile down there or something like that, right? Who wants to dive in a pool? But it's a great place to learn to get the water out of your mask. So one of the things, if you want to be able to handle panic, you want to be able to handle slightly alarmed first. And so the best thing to do is practice with these things very, very mild. So go back to your other question. If you're already freaked out, what do you do? Well, the first thing that freaks your brain out is feeling alone. So if I've got to handle this by myself, and I already am not very good at it, it's like being out in the ocean, there's no other boats around. That's much worse to our mind than I'm out in the ocean and here comes a boat, a rescue boat, so we got some potential there. So if your mind knows I'm not alone, there's someone that will help me, that is the first thing that's going to calm us down. So we want to think about, the best thing is who would be with me and want to help me under these conditions. If we can think of anybody like that, then we can usually start to rest to calm ourselves down. If there's no one that we can think of, it's going to be very, very hard. The other thing is our minds are always calculating, can I do this with the amount of energy and strength and ability that I have? So if I asked you to lift that chair over there, you'd probably do it. But if I asked you to lift a truck, your brain would calculate so fast, you're not going to lift that truck that you won't even try it. And if you suddenly realize that your child is under the truck or something very important, your mind freaks out simply because it goes, I have to do something I can't do. And so the second thing is, what resources are available for me? Now, human resources are more limited, but the more we train our mind that God, who's got a lot of resources and can actually do a lot of things that we can't, is with us, and he's able to do something about our situation, those kind of practices that keep teaching me under all kinds of conditions that I'm not alone, there's someone that wants to help me. Those are the kind of things that give us a lot of calm and help us settle down. So now we just have to get the adrenaline out of our system. And that's where the practice is, like taking a deep breath, doing the Moro reflex to trigger, the fear response, and then quiet and quiet, or yawning to the left and the right. Those are all things that just trigger your physiology to come out of the adrenaline arousal. But if you still feel like I'm all alone, you'll just freak out again. So, so this calming ourselves is always a relational thing in an odd sort of way. It's like we know there are people who will help us, and I know how to settle my own body. I guess the other thing is, have you ever found some people that are calming presence? Right. So if you can just go and be with somebody who's calming presence, at the distance that we're apart right now, your heart rate will show up in my brain waves if they're monitoring them, because your heart puts out such a large electrical signal.
Seriously?
Yeah, hundreds of times bigger than nerve cells will. It's a huge electrical signal that shows up if you're within about 3 feet of another person or closer. And it's impressive enough that if your heart is calm and mine is racing, just being that close to your heart is going to slow my heart rate down. Your brain will go, well, she's okay, so why can't I be? And there's just systems around us that we can activate if we knew they were there, but most of us are not. I mean, like you haven't heard that before, but
No, I haven't.
Well, we felt it though, haven't we?
Yeah.
You go next to someone, they're calm and they're going like, I'm kind of worried, but they're okay, and your body suddenly goes, wow, what happened to me?
So does it ever happen the other way around, where minds yours is racing and mine's calm, but mine starts racing because yours is, or is it always what's the predominant feeling?
There's a short-term and a long-term answer to that. The short-term answer is whoever's got the bigger brain will win. So if I'm a little child and my mom's freaked out, I will freak out because she's freaking out. She's got the bigger brain. Her nervous system's stronger than mine. I can't calm her down. I might try to, but I won't win. So in the short run, whoever's got the strongest signal wins. In the long run, your brain prefers the happier solution. So if you put somebody who has a normal nervous system with someone who has an abnormal nervous system, and they're together for some amount of time, and let's say they're roughly the same strength, the one who's running abnormally will always move in the direction of the normal one instead of the other way around. I mean, why does my nervous system want to run worse, right?
Well, true.
There's no incentive built into it for that. But if yours is running worse and you're next to another pattern that's better than yours, you're going like, oh, I don't know, I like that better. And so there's this built-in incentive to move towards health.
Because we're designed for that, aren't we?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
we're not designed to be in panic-stricken modes or that in the sympathetic nervous system all the time.
That's why we call it miserable.
Well,
the technical word.
Yeah, well, you went to school for that.
Yeah, I know.
I want to talk about trauma because as you were talking, I'm thinking of someone who has PTSD because I think it's stuff that I've learned about it. I've probably either heard from you or someone, Life Model Works, where I'm not going to try to explain it. Would you explain where someone who has PTSD, what is going on in their nervous system and in their brain?
All right. Well, the simplest element is our whole brain is designed to run together in harmony. And PTSD means that the different parts of your brain are not synchronized to each other. They're not running at the same time. The most salient or the most important feature is that whenever something important is happening, there's a little cluster of cells, about 200 cells down in your brain stem, that send a signal to your brain that goes, shh, something important's happening right now. And normally all of the brain cells quiet down and they'll watch, what was it? What is it that's important to happen right now? And so there's this signal that tells the brain, okay, be quiet a minute because something important's happening. We want you all to notice. When you have PTSD, that signal isn't very strong. And the other parts of the brain aren't listening. So what ends up happening is a lot of stuff runs around that gets, important stuff, but doesn't get noticed. All that gets noticed are the things that scare you. And so a little bit higher up, there's the amygdala, which looks for everything that's good, bad, and scary. And so it will watch everything coming in to see, is it bad and scary? And if not, it's like, nah, not important. We don't have to let the brain know about it. So your brain begins to only notice the things that are bad and scary. Everything else gets ignored because we're just watching for what's going to happen. That's PTSD. But one other element, which is the flashback element, means that when something reminds you or looks like it might be bad and scary, your brain pulls up all the memories of that, whatever that bad and scary thing is. So one of the examples was we were working with, there was a cruise ship that was hijacked by terrorists in the Mediterranean. And the terrorists wore blue shirts. And one of the people on that cruise ship, greatly fearing for her life for I think the 3 days that the terrorists held the ship, every time she saw a blue shirt coming, she would just run or tried to save her life, Well, her brain remembered that, and so when she returned to our city, every time someone came along with a blue shirt, it was just like the terrorists were back. The brain goes, I know that what that is means you're going to die. Well, the first thing you might guess is that in order to be her therapist, I couldn't wear blue shirts, right? That wasn't going to work because we couldn't get the brain into that alarm state, because once you're that alarmed, then the systems broke down and they weren't working together. And when your brain isn't running right, it's sort of like your computer when it gets that blue screen of death or something like that. You know, it's just, this isn't running. How do you solve life's problems when your computer shuts down that you need to use to solve life's problems? And that's why it becomes this never-ending loop. Every time the problem loads in, the computer shuts down. We can never solve it. At least that's why, while we can't solve it, it's PTSD. If you ever solve it, then it's a resolved trauma. And I suppose that might be your next question about how do we resolve it, or do you want to ask more about the symptoms?
I think I want to talk about trauma, and I definitely want to go down that route. There's many questions coming to mind, but I think PTSD, a lot of people sort of put it in the category, if I've been to war, and because the military, that's, I think, when people first started hearing about, oh, that's they have PTSD. But can someone have PTSD that was abused as a child, that was in a car accident, even if it wasn't that serious, but they, like you're talking about the blue shirt, every time they go through that intersection, they start, freaking out, or they're, whatever, they have different anxiety attacks or whatever. Like I guess, what are the effects of trauma? Is it always PTSD if I'm still having flashbacks to something, or do we even need to label it that? And then what's the road to recovery from that?
That's a very good and more complex problem than it's easy to explain, but there's a couple of variables that make it easier to kind of categorize. And one is, the younger your nervous system is, the less it takes to cause trauma. So there's something we call capacity, and that is, how much have I learned to handle? And if I have learned to have a fairly stable nervous system, so I can handle a lot of things myself, then it takes a whole lot to traumatize me, because if something upsetting happens, I can handle that. I know who I am. I can, sort of feel stable under these conditions. If I've got a very young nervous system, it doesn't take very much to get into a category of, I don't know how to handle this, I don't know what's happening to me, I don't know what's going on. And so one of the things we find, the earlier the trauma happens, the more damage it does. The more systems get affected by it. If it happens young enough, we don't even recognize that something got damaged. We just think that's how life is. So, have we had some normal life, and then something bad happens? Now we finally recognize that we've been damaged. So trauma has this whole great, the great big range, because your brain's always trying to answer one problem. And the problem is, how do I handle this? Okay? And especially, how do I handle it relationally? Will anyone help me when this happens? And the things that then cause trauma are the things that no one will help you with when it happens. You feel alone, overwhelmed, you don't know how to deal with it, and your brain goes, I can't handle this. So if I'm going to keep going, I'm going to have to do something with it. I'll have to forget about it. I'll have to not notice it. I can't talk to people about it because it doesn't get me any help. And every time something reminds me of that, then I have a bad reaction, because now I'm in this position. I don't know how to handle this any better now than I did before. And even when we've learned later things that would have helped us to handle it, when the brain loads the memory in, it also remembers you couldn't handle it. So it comes already with the message that you think about this, you can't handle it. And so part of the way that therapy works is that we, with the confidence of having someone else with you, right, not alone, your brain will maybe have another look at, well, I wonder if I could handle it now, because at least someone will sit with me through this, and we'll try this again. And when we can finally solve it, okay, now how am I going to handle this? How will I be able to relate to other people if they know about this thing? Well, someone listens to you and they go, well, you know what? They'll be compassionate. Whoa, that's new. And now your brain has got a new prediction for it, right? Anything that's bad happens again, there'll be people that are compassionate. I don't have to handle it by myself. Oh, it's miserable, but I can deal with this. It won't keep running through your head trying to feel, how will I handle this situation? And in the short range, that's how trauma recovery happens. But if the trauma is too intense and it loads into your brain, it'll just shut your brain down. Then you'll think, I don't remember it. Because every time you try to load it in, it shuts your brain down, so consciously you can't remember what happens.
How do you get that out?
Now you have to actually build your relational capacity. You have to build your brain's ability, because we could actually measure the trauma in terms of microvolts. Here's how strong the signal is. And your nervous system actually just goes bzz when you put that much signal on it.
So like short circuits.
It's right, yeah. Mm-hmm. And so that shuts down the system because there's too much voltage. So if you learn to build more intensity and stay relational, and your brain only wants to do that one way, and that's by joy. So joy has got intensity to it. It's a emotional reaction. If I learn to have stronger and stronger and stronger joy, as I'm smiling, I'm happier, my brain will then develop the capacity to handle a larger voltage. Now when something loads in, it goes, well, I can handle that voltage. It's miserable voltage, but I handle it the same way I would any kind of voltage. It's sort of simple physics in that way. Now that it loads in and I can handle it, now I can consciously also remember it. It's like, oh, now I can think about this where before it used to shut me down. Now I know what it is that shut me down. I couldn't think about it before, I wouldn't know, right? And that's how, what we call, these forgotten memories.
Yeah.
They're actually too intense for our nervous system, so we have to build capacity to be able to handle something more intense and keep thinking.
So how's that for a lot to chew on?
Well, I'm still chewing, and I'm sure you are, and you may need to listen to this a few times over.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting with him being all these questions. I had a list of questions going into the interview, and we did cover some of them, but honestly, what he shared stimulated and inspired even more questions, and I could have sat down with him for 2 or 3 hours. Because he would say,
probably
well,
weeks.
That's true. He would say something.
He's brilliant.
And that would whoa, oh my gosh, I need to ask this. Well, what about this? What about this? And unfortunately, our time was limited, but he was so gracious to share as much as he could in the time that we had. And
he's such a gentle soul as
he's
well.
Very
tender
he's
and gentle.
very humble and very gentle and very generous with his information and time. And like Dr. Carl Lehman, they really just want people to be operating in the fullness of their capacity, in the fullness of their God-given identity, in the fullness of maturity. And they are not stingy, or they don't hold tightly to this. They want everyone to hear it.
Right.
And that's what I appreciate so much about both of these gentlemen, because they have years and years and years of study and research and toil. And now they are sharing the fruits of their labor with everybody because they see the impact
they're
it has.
Making it accessible, and digestible as well. And what an amazing gift! What a gift to the body of Christ! Because this is really where sustainability comes in. Because you can have a huge breakthrough in an inner healing session, and it can be a big deal and it can be a game changer, but there's still walking that healing out. I think a lot of people think that inner healing should be like a magic pill. Like I'll take it and boom, everything's going to be great. And yeah, that might happen, but more often it's about walking it out, pressing into your relationship and intimacy with Jesus, and learning how to develop healthy relationships and healthy brain skills. And we're actually going to talk to some more people about that as we go through our content, but just developing these skills for relationships, to have healthy relationships and to learn how to operate in emotional maturity.
I think one of the things that stuck out to me, and I remember teaching from him a few years ago, was that we need to practice the returning to joy, returning to our relational circuits on when we're not in a panicked situation. He uses the example of someone drowning. That is not the time to teach someone to swim. It's too late. It's too late for that. Yeah. And he also gives the example of like Navy SEALs or military training for battle or for combat, you don't teach someone how to use a gun in combat. You're
Right.
doing it in peaceful times.
Right.
So that the soldier, they're trained in peaceful times so that when they are in combat, then their brain automatically knows what to do.
It's already
in a
wired to
panic
do it.
situation.
Yeah.
In an emergency, urgent situation. And that's why it's important to practice these skills when we're not in a place of intense negative emotion. Like he
Right.
said, when we're slightly alarmed, we can practice coming back to peace, coming back
Yeah.
to calm. So that when we're not slightly alarmed, when we're extremely overwhelmed or panicked or fear-filled, then our brain will automatically go to that place. It won't be as hard to put these into practice.
Well, there was a lot to unpack in this session, but Dr. Wilder really did such a brilliant job, and it might just mean listening to it again because we don't want to keep repeating what he said. We don't want to add to that, but just know that this stuff has been tested and tried and proven with brain science. He's not just on a whim thinking of a theory and telling us some ideas that he has, maybe. This is stuff that's actually proven, and it is scientifically backed. This is how our brain works. And when you can marry the wiring of our brain and how God designed our brains for relationships, and you can marry that into the inner healing journey and into healthy relationships and into more sustainability for the healing that you're walking out, it really is a game changer. So if you need to hit rewind, go for it. This is phenomenal content, and it's only half the interview. We're going to have the other half next week.
And practicing what Dr. Carl was talking about, practicing Emmanuel, practicing his presence, and then practicing
Appreciation.
shalom. Yes, that's the huge component of this, practicing shaloming your body. That will help you to have the bigger brain, as he was talking about.
The bigger brain.
We have
the bigger
to
signal.
develop that. We actually have to develop that in ourselves. And if you think of kind of like airplane instructions, put on the mask before helping others, when we work on ourselves first, then we can actually help others. But
Right.
if both of us come to the plate of, oh my God, this is happening, neither of us have the skill or capacity or maturity to know how to deal with this, then, oh, wow, you're both kind of like end up
Yeah.
in a pit. But if we can help one another, that is really where healing happens in community,
In
helping
community.
one another. And I love that he said, and I remember when he said this, that right now, if you could see your heart rate,
Yes.
it would basically show up on
Yes.
on his screen. And I just thought, wow, we're really in sync with one another,
Yes.
because we were very close to one another in proximity doing this interview for a camera's angle's sake. And I just thought, okay, let's just sit for a while longer, because you're a very calm person.
Yeah.
I want to
Well,
learn
it's
from
true
you.
that you want to be around people that have what you need. Like if you're looking for calm, you want to be with somebody who's calm, that can help
Exactly.
you calm down and to help you to synchronize and be able to help you get back into the front relational part of your brain. So I think it's brilliant that there's science for that. It's just amazing. And the body is so phenomenally created. God did such a brilliant, brilliant job.
This just makes me love God more.
Yes,
His
so
creativity,
amazing.
his built-in healing. I mean, he really put in our brain a built-in network to be able to thrive and not just survive in life.
Right.
And it's just learning the tools and learning the skills and then practicing them.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for listening. We'd love to hear from you. We would love to
Yes,
hear your
communicate
comments,
with
your
us.
questions, what this is doing for you, if it's helping you.
Do you like it?
Yeah.
Are you happy with the
Please
content? Let us know.
And you can contact us through our website, face2faceministries.org. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram at face2facemin, that's one word, and sign up for our monthly newsletter. I promise you will not be spammed.
Nope.
You'll just
Once a
get
month
to
you'll hear from us.
more of what we're up to, and subscribe.
Yeah, subscribe. I think anything less than a 5-star rating would just be not enough. So we want a 5-star rating from you. Hopefully you feel that it's worth it. And write a review wherever you listen to podcasts. I know it's kind of easy on iTunes. Google's not so easy on the review thing, but it would be really helpful. We've got some really great reviews on there you could go in and check out too. And share it with your friends. When we publish the podcast, share it out to your friends. Help us get the word out, because this is really important stuff. This is really, really important. We were talking to somebody this past week. I was having a conversation, and he's actually over a healing ministry in Atlanta, Georgia. And we're going to interview him at one point. He was my former pastor. And he said, you girls are sitting on a gold mine. The content is solid. It's gold. I don't think people realize the favor of the yeses that we have had with the people who have sat down with us face to face, given freely of their time. And we are excited and honored to be able to steward this content and get it out to you as quickly as we can. And it really helps us to get the word out if you share, subscribe, rate, review, all of those things.
And if you're loving what you're hearing, we would deeply appreciate a donation.
Yes.
We don't get paid for this. In fact, we pay to actually publish.
Yeah, it costs us monthly
podcast
to do these.
So we would really deeply appreciate your sowing into this financially and become a podcast patron.
Yeah.
And I know that, sometimes it's hard to ask for that, but every other podcast I listen to, and even Brene Brown, Oprah Winfrey, they all ask for donation. I'm like, Oprah don't need no donations. Okay. She's like a billionaire. We need donations. We would appreciate it to help this keep going. And so if you're loving what you're hearing, if it's helpful, please consider sowing into it financially.
Yeah. And here's something else that's coming up in a couple weeks. If you're on our newsletter list by then, you're going to be getting a newsletter from us that's actually going to be a special edition on fundraising, because we are going to be traveling to the East Coast. We live in California, and we're going to be traveling to the East Coast and be out there for a couple of months, because we have 7 or 8 more interviews that we're going to sit down face to face with some folks over on the East Coast for future podcast episodes and future video projects. So that's something that we're going to be launching fundraising for, and would love to have you sponsor some of those interviews, and it'd be awesome. So thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, thank you for being with us.
Really is awesome to see those numbers going up, and we really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much, and we will be back next week with part 2 with Dr. Jim Wilder.
All right, looking forward to seeing you through the airwaves.
There you go. See ya.